20 years. 17 doctors. Not one of them found the answer. Scarlet Wynn ran a $4 billion financial empire from a wheelchair, and the world had grown so accustomed to that fact that no one questioned it anymore. No one asked why. No one looked twice. No one, that is, except the man who had no business being there at all. He was not a doctor, not anymore. He was a single father in a blue uniform, pushing a hand truck through the door of her penthouse office, delivering a box that didn't matter. He looked at Scarlet for 8 seconds. Then he said the one thing that 20 years and 17 specialists had never said, and from that moment, nothing stayed the same. Keep watching, because what happened next changed everything. Neither of them knew they were still waiting for. The rain had been falling since before sunrise, and Sebastian Cole did not own an umbrella. He kept meaning to buy one. He kept not buying one. The detail belonged to a longer list of small things he had stopped maintaining after Diana died. The kind of list a person accumulates when survival replaces living, and the margin for anything extra simply disappears. He pulled his delivery van into the loading bay of the Wynn Capitol Tower at 7:45 in the morning, cut the engine, and sat for 3 seconds longer than necessary. Just 3 seconds. Then he climbed out. The cargo was straightforward. 2 sealed boxes of medical documentation equipment, a portable diagnostic display unit, and its calibration accessories, ordered through a third-party procurement vendor and routed to the executive floor. Sebastian loaded them onto his hand truck, checked the delivery manifest, and wheeled through the service entrance. The building was cold, the way expensive buildings are always cold, aggressively climate-controlled, as if the temperature itself were a statement of consequence. He rode the freight elevator to the 38th floor. His boots were clean but not new. His uniform was pressed the way a man presses a uniform when he irons at 5:30 in the morning before waking a 7-year-old girl who refuses to eat breakfast without her father sitting across from her. The small disciplines, the ones that no one notices, but that hold a life together the way mortar holds stone. The assistant who met him at the elevator was a woman in her early 40s, composed, precise in the way people become precise when they have spent years managing someone important. Her name was Abigail. She led him down a corridor of pale marble and glass toward the main office without offering conversation, and Sebastian followed without requiring it. He had been inside rooms like this before. He remembered the particular quality of silence in rooms where decisions with large consequences were made a silence that had weight to it, that pressed lightly on the chest. He recognized it the way a man recognizes the smell of a hospital even when there are no hospitals nearby, through a memory that lives in the body and not the mind. Scarlet Wynn did not look up when he entered. She sat behind a desk that was wide and dark, and covered in layered documents, her pen moving across a margin note with the focused velocity of someone for whom interruption was simply not a category of experience. The wheelchair was matte black, custom-framed, positioned with the precision of a piece of office furniture rather than a medical device. She wore a white blazer, collar open, hair pulled back. The reading glasses she had pushed halfway down her nose gave her the look of someone who had already decided what everything meant before you opened your mouth. Sebastian set the boxes down. He pulled out his delivery scanner and waited for the confirmation prompt. While the device processed, his eyes moved. Not deliberately, not with professional intent. They move the way eyes move when a person has spent 6 years training themselves to observe without touching a reflex that does not turn off simply because the license that sanctioned it has been set aside in a drawer. He saw the angle of her right hip relative to the seat cushion. He saw the position of her feet on the footrests, left flat, right slightly drawn back. He saw the way her left wrist adjusted when the air conditioning shifted the top page of her stack, 2 millimeters. He saw the small involuntary flex of the right calf barely visible, almost nothing, the kind of movement that appears in exactly 0 cases of structural paralysis and in nearly every case of something else entirely. 8 seconds. Then, low and almost to himself, the words came before he consciously chose them. Your right foot is pulling back. Scarlet Wynn looked up for the first time. The silence that followed was not hostile. It was the silence of a person who has heard something so precisely unexpected that the ordinary social mechanisms for responding to it simply do not activate. Her pen stopped. She looked at him, not at his uniform, not at his scanner, not at the boxes. At him. Sebastian held her gaze for 1 second, then looked back at his scanner. The confirmation prompt had appeared. He pressed accept, tore off the receipt, and set it on the corner of her desk. "Have a good morning," he said. He was back in the elevator before either of them fully processed what had just happened. But the words had already landed, and the room, though it looked exactly the same, was not. Sebastian did not think about it on the drive back to the depot. He thought about Chloe's school lunch. He had packed the wrong crackers, the plain ones she tolerated, instead of the cheddar ones she loved. And he thought about the tuition supplemental payment due by Friday, and the way the numbers never quite lined up the way he arranged them in his head. He thought about the stack of mail on the kitchen counter. One envelope he recognized by its return address and had not yet opened. He had been not opening it for 11 days. He picked Chloe up at 3 o'clock, and she ran to him the way she always ran, with her backpack swinging and her sneakers untied, with the particular unguarded velocity of a child who has never once doubted that someone will be waiting at the gate. She elbowed her way under his arm and told him about the painting she had made in art class, a woman in a chair with big wheels. The teacher had said people in wheelchairs could do anything, and Chloe had thought about that the whole afternoon and decided it was probably true, but that it was also probably still hard, and that it was important to know both things at once. Sebastian looked at the painting. The woman in the chair had orange hair and a yellow dress, and was smiling in the tentative way children draw smiles when they are trying to be kind. He did not say anything. He folded the painting carefully and placed it on the back seat. Scarlet Wynn had not said anything to anyone about what the delivery driver said. Not to Abigail, not to her attorney, not to Richard Ashby when he called at noon to review the board agenda. She had simply continued her day with the focused efficiency she had built over 2 decades into something so practiced it resembled armor. But efficiency requires full attention, and her attention was no longer fully available. That evening, alone in her private bathroom, she looked at her right foot for a long time. She had not looked at it this way, not studying it, not watching it in years. The doctors had always done the looking. She had learned to be looked at rather than to look. She had learned, somewhere in the years of appointments and assessments and careful explanations of what could not be explained, to be the subject of inquiry rather than its source. She watched the foot. Nothing dramatic happened, but after 4 minutes of stillness, she thought she felt imagined, perhaps a faint pull in the back of her calf. She told herself it was nothing. She called Abigail at 9:15 that night. "The delivery driver from this morning," she said. "The one who brought the medical equipment. I need his full name and service identification." Abigail was quiet for a moment. "I'll have it in the morning. Tonight, please." By 10 o'clock, a file sat open on Scarlett's screen. Sebastian Aaron Cole, 32 years old. Prior occupation: attending physician, neurology, Mercy General Hospital, licensed through the current year, renewal pending, research background 6 years. Functional neurological disorder, psychogenic non-epileptic presentations, conversion spectrum conditions, co-investigator on the Marsh-Cole study, published and subsequently contested in 2019, current employment, regional delivery driver, Coastal Express Logistics, hired 14 months prior. Scarlett read the file twice. Then she sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a long time. "Why is he driving a truck?" she said to no one. She arranged a second delivery for Thursday morning, a shipment of office supply equipment, fabricated in the order notes as an urgent replacement. Abigail placed the order without comment. Before ending the call, Scarlett added one instruction: When he arrives, bring him in directly, and don't contact Richard first." Sebastian knew it was not a real delivery by the time the elevator doors opened. The corridor was the same, the cold air was the same, but Abigail was waiting for him at the elevator rather than at the office door, and the look on her face was the carefully neutral expression of a person carrying out instructions they have decided are not their business to question. He set the box down inside the door. Scarlett was waiting this time, not working. She had turned the wheelchair toward the entrance, and her hands were folded in her lap with the deliberate stillness of a person who has rehearsed this posture. "You were a doctor," she said. He didn't confirm or deny it immediately. He looked at her the way he had looked at her on Monday. Not at her situation, not at her wheelchair, not at the carefully assembled professional surface of her. At her. "I was," he said. "You looked at me for 8 seconds and said something that none of the 17 physicians in my file have ever said. I'm not practicing anymore. I know. I read your file last night." She paused. "I'm not asking you to practice. I'm asking you what you saw." Sebastian was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that is not hesitation but consideration, the space a person takes when they are deciding whether the truth will cost more than it gives. "Functional neurological disorder," he said. "Your nervous system isn't broken. It's blocked. There's a difference. Structural paralysis from spinal damage, from lesions, doesn't produce the movement patterns you were showing on Monday. Your right foot has involuntary microcontractions. Your protective reflexes are intact. The pathway is there. Your brain is suppressing the signal." Scarlett did not speak. "FND doesn't come from physical damage," he continued. "It comes from a psychological event, significant enough that the brain essentially locks the motor system down. It's more common than Parkinson's disease. It's almost never diagnosed correctly because most physicians stop looking for physical causes and never think to look for any other kind." "And what caused mine?" she said. It was not entirely a question. "I don't know. But you do." The silence that followed was different from the first one. This one had edges. "I'd like you to leave," she said. He picked up his scanner, left the receipt on the edge of her desk as before, and walked to the door. He paused there, not turning around. "The treatment doesn't require me," he said. "It requires you to say something out loud that you've never been allowed to say." Then he was gone. She did not sleep that night either. She was 14 years old when it happened. A ski trip in Vermont, the last week of February. 3 days before her mother's birthday. She had been the one to suggest the off-trail run. She had been the one who said it would be fine, that the slope wasn't too steep, that they were both good enough. Her best friend's name was Madison Ellery, and Madison had followed her without hesitation, because Madison always followed Scarlett without hesitation, because that was the nature of their friendship and the particular cruelty of that kind of loyalty. Madison did not come back up the mountain. Scarlett had not said her name to anyone in many years. Not in the way that matters, not in the private language of unfinished grief, not with the weight of the real thing attached to it. She had said it in medical contexts. Traumatic event at 14, witnessed fatality, close personal relationship. She had said it as data. She had never said it as love. She had never said, "I am sorry, Madison. I am sorry I asked you to follow me somewhere I should not have led you." Richard Ashby had been a fixture in her professional life since she was 22, when she inherited the chairmanship of Wynn Capital following her father's death, and found herself in possession of a financial empire she had not yet learned to run. He had appeared at exactly the right moment, as certain people do, with competence and calm authority, and a kind of organized care that a grieving young woman in a wheelchair found genuinely indispensable. He had helped her build the Medical Advisory Council. He had coordinated the specialist referrals. He had been present at every consultation, every reassessment, every quiet moment of disappointment, when a new protocol produced no progress. For 20 years, Scarlett had called this loyalty. She had not, until now, considered a different word for it. The documentation she requested from Abigail arrived in 4 separate file folders: original medical records, intake notes, progress evaluations, treatment summaries. Scarlett spent an evening going through them, with the same focused precision she applied to quarterly financial reviews, and what she found arranged itself into a pattern, the way patterns always do once you know what shape you are looking for. 3 separate points in her treatment history, where documented motor improvement had been followed, within 2 weeks, by a change of physician or a revision of treatment protocol. Not dramatic changes, subtle redirections. 1 handwriting note in a margin, not Richard's, an assistant's read: RCA requested file review before next session. The RCA was Richard Chandler Ashby. She placed the folders in her desk drawer and locked it. The call from the logistics company came on a Friday. Sebastian's supervisor used the word suspension in the same flat tone used by people who deliver bad news that is not their own. There had been a complaint. A client had reported inappropriate contact with a residential executive. Pending review. The wording was careful, legal, the kind of language that causes maximum damage with minimum traceable cause. Sebastian listened to the full message standing in his kitchen, while Chloe ate cereal at the table behind him. He set the phone down. He stood at the counter for a moment. Then he turned around, sat down across from his daughter, and asked if she had remembered her library book. Chloe had not remembered her library book. This was a manageable problem. He was grateful for it. Abigail told Scarlett about the suspension on a Monday morning, in the same breath as the overnight legal summary and the board calendar revision. Scarlett stopped her at that item. Abigail repeated it. Scarlett asked who had filed the complaint. Abigail said the name on the form was false, a shell entity associated with a private legal coordination firm that Richard Ashby had retained for consulting purposes 3 years prior. Scarlett said nothing for a moment. Then, "Get me the original personnel file from Coastal Express and clear my 11 o'clock. Richard appeared in her office at 11:15, unscheduled, which was itself unusual. He wore his concern the way he wore his suits, tailored, composed, leaving no visible seam. He sat across from her and spoke with quiet care about the importance of professional boundaries and the legal exposure of accepting informal medical contact from an unlicensed practitioner. He said the word protect 3 times. He said her name 4 times. He did not once ask how she was feeling. Scarlett looked at him, really looked not with the practiced deference of 20 years of manufactured gratitude, but with the eyes of a person who has just read the same document twice and understood it both times. "Thank you, Richard," she said. "I'll take it under advisement." He left satisfied. He should not have been. It was a Tuesday when Chloe arrived at the Wynn Capitol building by accident, which is to say that the accident was entirely predictable to anyone who knew her. Sebastian had brought her along to the lobby to collect a signature for the personnel dispute, a standard clearance form that required in-person confirmation, and she had waited for approximately 4 minutes before, deciding that waiting was not something she was currently interested in. The lobby of the Wynn Capitol Tower was large and pale and largely empty at that hour, and Chloe explored it with the systematic curiosity of a child who treats every new space as a problem to be fully understood. She found the side corridor. She found the elevator that had been propped open for a facilities delivery. She found, when the elevator doors opened on the 3rd floor, a woman in a black wheelchair waiting to board. They looked at each other. Chloe did not show the mixture of pity and discomfort that adults typically produced in this moment. She looked at Scarlett with the open, direct attention of a person who has not yet learned to pretend she doesn't see what she sees. "Do you want to stand up?" Chloe asked. Scarlett opened her mouth, closed it. "Everybody wants to," she said finally, quietly. Chloe considered this. My dad wants to do lots of things he can't do yet. But he says, you just have to start by remembering why you wanted to. She thought for another moment. He says remembering is the hard part. The doing part comes after. Scarlett was very still. Sebastian found Chloe 40 seconds later, slightly breathless, his hand truck abandoned in the lobby. He saw the two of them in the corridor, his daughter looking up at Scarlett Wynn with her uncomplicated directness, and Scarlett Wynn looking back with an expression he could not immediately name. Not the controlled professional surface he had seen before. Something older than that. I'm sorry, he said, reaching for Chloe's hand. She doesn't stay where you put her. She told me something, Scarlett said. Her voice was different. Not softer exactly, but less armored. She said the remembering is the hard part. Sebastian looked at his daughter. Chloe was not paying attention to either of them. She had discovered a crack in the floor tile that she found interesting. She gets that from me, he said, though she explains it better. Scarlett looked at him for a moment. I need you to not give up, she said. I know what Richard did. I know why. And I'm not ready to stop. Sebastian was quiet. I'm not practicing. I know. Come back Wednesday. Not here. Abigail will send you an address. Bring nothing. Just come. Chloe looked up from the floor tile. Can I come too? Scarlett almost smiled. It was the first time in a very long while that a smile arrived without being consciously assembled. The address was a fourth-floor apartment in a building 2 blocks from the tower, Abigail's personal residence, offered without explanation and accepted without one. It had a good window and a clear space of floor between the couch and the wall, and that was all the space they needed. The first Wednesday, Sebastian talked about nothing medical. He asked about Madison. Scarlett gave him single sentences at first, the abbreviated biography of grief that a person produces when they have spent 20 years compressing something too large to carry into the smallest possible form. Sebastian listened, the way he had once listened to patients without interruption, without the forward lean of someone waiting for their turn. He simply received what was offered and waited for the next sentence to arrive on its own. By the end of the hour, she had said Madison's full name 4 times. The last time, she said it without any preceding clause, without context or explanation, just the name, plain and whole, the way a name sounds when you stop apologizing for needing to say it. Was that the first time? Sebastian asked. She did not answer right away. In the way that counts, she said finally. Yes. The second Wednesday, he taught her a breathing exercise. Breath movement coupling, a technique from the FND protocol research, designed to re-establish the neural link between respiratory rhythm and voluntary motor output. The theory was that the motor pathways in functional neurological disorder are suppressed but not absent, and that certain rhythmic patterns of controlled breathing could create a temporary window through which voluntary movement could begin to travel again. He guided her through the pattern. 4 counts in, hold, 4 counts out, and at the peak of each exhale, the smallest possible intentional movement of the left hand. Not a command to move. An invitation. 12 minutes into the exercise, her left index finger moved, not a twitch. A deliberate extension and return, brief and quiet as a caught breath, but entirely under her direction. Neither of them said anything. Sebastian kept his eyes on his hands, which were resting flat on the table in front of him. Scarlett kept her eyes on the window. The room was very still. Her breathing changed. That was all. But it was enough. Richard Ashby arrived at the Wynn Capitol building at 7:30 on a Thursday morning, which was 40 minutes earlier than his scheduled time, and found the parking garage level 2 emptier than usual. He sat in his car for a moment, reviewing the report his investigator had sent the night before. The report confirmed what he had suspected. Sebastian Cole and Scarlett Wynn had been meeting at a private address since the preceding week. The address belonged to the executive assistant. The sessions were not being logged in the official medical schedule, not entered in the coordination calendar, not routed through any of the oversight channels Richard had spent years carefully maintaining. He understood what this meant. Not immediately, but with the gradual cold clarity of a man who has built a position on someone else's limitation and now sees the foundation beginning to shift. He had not done it out of malice. In the beginning. That was the truth he returned to when he needed to. He had done it out of the ordinary human instinct to be needed, and he had found over years that the most efficient way to remain needed was to ensure that nothing resolved. Small things. A phone call that redirected a promising specialist. A report that arrived at the wrong committee. A treatment protocol that was modified just slightly. Just enough. The money had come later, first as a consequence, and then as a motivation. The two things blurring together the way they do when a person stops examining the reasons for what they do. He called his attorney. He used the phrase fiduciary incapacity. He used the phrase vulnerability assessment. He scheduled an emergency board session for the following Thursday. Abigail saw the calendar notification at 11:15 that night and photographed it with her personal phone. She sent the image to Scarlett at 11:16. The third Wednesday began at 6 in the morning and ended at noon. By the end of it, Scarlett could bear weight on both feet while gripping the edge of the windowsill. Not walking, not standing, unassisted, but the transfer of weight, the physical fact of the floor pressing back against the soles of her feet was real, and it was hers. She did not celebrate. She sat back in the wheelchair, closed her eyes, and was quiet for a long time. Sebastian sat across the room and gave the quiet what it needed. Nothing but space. "Tell me about your wife," she said. He was surprised by the question, though he probably should not have been. He told her the important things, the ones that fit in a few sentences. Diana. 3 years ago. A surgical consent he had signed, because the attending had asked him to authorize it as a family decision, not as a physician. He had known the risk profile. He had accepted it. She had not made it through the surgery. He had not been in a medical context since. "You treated me," Scarlett said, "but you haven't treated yourself." Sebastian looked at the window. "No," he agreed. "The license renewal," she said. "The envelope. You've been not opening it." He didn't ask how she knew. She had simply read him, the way he had read her, with enough patience and enough care for what was actually visible rather than what was presented. "It requires a declaration of current practice intent," he said. "And you haven't decided yet." "Not until recently." She looked at him. He met her eyes. "Chloe drew me a picture," she said. "The day you both came to the building. In it I'm standing." "I know." She told me. She also drew a star in the corner. She said it was for someone you missed, so they would know they weren't forgotten. Sebastian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She told me she drew it for you. But I think she drew it for Diana, too." "I think so, too." The board meeting convened at 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning in the 38th floor conference room. 12 members. The table was long, pale wood. A surface designed to project neutrality while enabling consequence. Richard Ashby sat at the far end with the settled confidence of a man who has arranged the room in advance of arriving in it. He had the proposal in front of him, 6 pages, formally bound, requesting a temporary independent assessment of the CEO's decision-making capacity following, as the language read, documented exposure to an unlicensed medical practitioner with potential undue influence concerns. He was in the middle of his opening remarks when the door opened. It was not the entrance that silenced the room. It was the absence of the wheelchair. Scarlett Wynne stood in the doorway with one hand resting lightly against the frame. The contact was minimal support, not dependence. She wore charcoal and white, her posture steady, her expression the controlled, deliberate thing she had spent a career constructing, but that now, for the first time, had something underneath it that was not armor but ground. She walked to the head of the table, slowly, not performing the slowness, simply moving at the pace her body offered. Each step was real, and each step was hers. She sat down at her chair. The wheelchair was not in the room. No one spoke for a long moment. She opened the leather folder she had placed on the table before the meeting began. She had arrived 40 minutes early. "I've been looking forward to this meeting," she said, "because it's the last one Richard will attend in this building." Richard's composure held, though something in his jaw shifted. "Scarlett, I understand this is an emotional, the original medical records." She slid a stack of documents to the center of the table, acquired directly from the managing archive, without routing through the advisory coordination office, which is to say, without Richard's office. She slid a second set alongside it. The versions submitted to this board's Health Assessment Committee over the past 15 years. There are 3 material discrepancies. I've marked them. She placed a third document at the edge of the table, a printed research paper. The Marsh-Cole paper, 2019. A peer-reviewed study demonstrating that functional neurological disorder, when accurately diagnosed, has a recovery rate above 60% with appropriate intervention. Richard coordinated the filing of a contested review that delayed the paper's acceptance in 2 major journals for 11 months. During that time, none of the physicians in my care were shown the study. Richard stood. "You are not in a state to..." The financial disclosure. Abigail, standing near the door, pressed a key on her laptop. The projection screen at the end of the room illuminated a chain of internal communications, time-stamped and formally formatted. 17 years of consulting fees from Carrington Medical Group, a pharmaceutical management firm whose revenue model depends on long-term neurological treatment protocols. $1.8 million, total, received through a private advisory arrangement. Richard Ashby's name is on every transfer authorization. The room was very quiet. Richard's voice, when it came, was low and careful. "This is a fabricated attack from someone whose judgment has been compromised by..." "I'm standing, Richard," Scarlett said, simply, without force, just the fact of it. "For the first time in 20 years, I'm standing. Would you like to explain to this board how that represents compromised judgment?" He did not sit back down, but he did not speak again. The board chair, a quiet man named Harrington, who had occupied his position for 9 years without controversy, primarily by being the last to speak in any room, cleared his throat and asked Richard to excuse himself pending an independent review. He used the word pending in the way people use it when they mean permanent. Richard left the room. He left the building an hour later. Sebastian was in the hallway when the board session ended. He had not been invited. He had not asked to be. He had driven Chloe to school at 7:45, watched her run through the gate with her backpack swinging, and then driven across the city and ridden the elevator to the 38th floor, and sat down on a chair in the corridor and waited because it was the only thing available to him, and it was enough. He was still wearing his jacket, not the delivery uniform, just a jacket, gray and worn at the left cuff when the conference room door opened. Scarlett crossed the corridor toward him without the chair. Her pace was still measured, but each step landed with something that had not been there before. Not performance, not proof, just the quiet, ordinary weight of a person moving through the world on her own terms. He stood up. She stopped a few feet from him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "I'm sorry about what Richard did to your suspension," she said. "That's been resolved." "I know. I resolved it." He almost smiled. "There's something I want to ask you," she said. "Why did you stop?" Really, he had answered a version of this question before, but not the real one, and they both knew it. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the floor. Then at her. "Because I could do everything the training required," he said. "And it still wasn't enough. And if it wasn't enough for Diana, I wasn't sure I had the right to keep asking it of anyone else." Scarlett was quiet. Then, You looked at me for 8 seconds and said the one thing no one else had said in 20 years. That's not someone who stopped knowing how to help. That's someone who stopped believing they had permission. He didn't respond right away. He looked at her in the particular way that is not clinical and not social, but something older than both, the way one person looks at another when they have seen each other at the bottom of something and survived it. You healed me, she said. But you haven't healed yourself. You said that before. I'll keep saying it until you open the envelope. Sebastian looked at the window at the end of the corridor. The rain had stopped at some point during the morning. The city outside was damp and bright in the way cities are after a long rain. Everything slightly more itself. 3 months later, on a Tuesday morning in late autumn, Sebastian sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a folder. The folder held a completed license renewal declaration signed, dated, intent, declared, active practice, neurological rehabilitation, FND, specialty protocol. He had filled it out slowly over the course of a week, the way a person does something they have been afraid of for a long time. Carefully, in installments. With patience for themselves. He was looking at it when his phone buzzed. Scarlett's name on the screen. 3 sentences. I walked to the park this morning. First time since I was 14. Thank you. He read it twice. Then he picked up a pen and signed the envelope flap, pressed it closed, and placed it in the outgoing mail tray by the door. Chloe came into the kitchen in her pajamas, trailing her blanket, and looked at the envelope with the expression she used when she was determining whether something was important. Is that a good thing in that envelope, Daddy? Yes, he said. A good thing. She climbed onto the chair across from him and accepted the glass of orange juice he slid toward her. She looked at him for a moment with the uncomplicated directness that had always been her particular gift to him. Is Miss Scarlett coming for dinner this week? Sebastian looked at the envelope, then at his daughter, then at the small bright rectangle of window above the sink, where the morning was arriving without ceremony, ordinary and sufficient. I'll ask her, he said. Chloe nodded. This seemed to settle something for her. She drank her juice. He sat there for another minute. In the kitchen of his small apartment, in the ordinary Tuesday morning light, and felt not happiness exactly. Not yet, but the accurate precursor to it. The sense that the door was no longer locked, that whatever was on the other side was not what he had been afraid of. The envelope would be in the outgoing mail within the hour. 20 years was not a mystery. It was a story that needed the right person to listen long enough to hear it. Sebastian Cole had listened, not because he had the credentials, not because he had the protocol, not because he had anything at all except the capacity to remain in a room with someone's truth without flinching. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, in the cases that matter most, that is the only instrument that works. He had walked into her office with a hand truck and 2 boxes and 8 seconds of attention. She had stood up and walked out of a room that had held her for 20 years. Neither of them had done it alone. That was the part that mattered. That was the part that would still be true tomorrow. And off script, approximate word count, 5,580 words.